Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Teacher's Point of View. We've got a special primary head teacher on this episode, Dan Edwards. Welcome to the Teacher's Point of View. Can you please just kind of start us off by introducing yourself, like your journey in education and kind of how the last maybe 10 months have been?
Yeah, well, okay. I'm currently primary principal in Leicester. My school is Woodstock Primary Academy. So if anybody knows Leicester, we're just right in the centre of the East Midlands. And I really enjoy being the principal there. I think it's been a really interesting journey. Prior to primary education, I originally trained as a secondary school teacher. So I did my training as a English and drama secondary teacher. And prior to that, I had no real teaching experience at all. I did a degree in performance studies a long time ago, and I came into teaching very, very late. I say very late, I was 28, but I went through the graduate teacher program, which was very much quite hands-on. So I was, as soon as I started, I was, had a full timetable. I was a year 8 form tutor for my sins. And it was a real kind of, I was thrown in at the deep end and just really enjoyed the challenges of teaching, challenges of secondary school. And it was brilliant. It was brilliant. It was the best thing I ever did. And I found this just felt that the classroom was the place for me, really. So I taught GCSE, and then I went to A-level general studies and A-level extended project, if that was a thing. But after a while of secondary education, I was doing more and more outreach work with primary schools. And what I was doing was making opportunities for my A-level students to go out and do some, drama workshops with younger children. And as soon as I went out and worked with those students and kind of immersed myself back into a primary school and a primary classroom, there was something that I felt quite excited about. And I took some time out of teaching. I took a little bit of a break. I went to work for myself, funded by creative partnership money back in the day, where there was lots of government funding to do lots of creative projects in schools and learning opportunities. So I spent a couple of years working with a colleague and creating projects for a whole range of pupil outcomes and a whole range of different pupils and students. And then the time came to really reconsider where I wanted to go. And I took the opportunity to go back to, well, not go back, but to restart my teaching career in primary. So I actually went back to the primary school that I went to as a child. So I saw an advert and I was really excited about going back to my primary school. There's probably something quite romantic about it, about going back. And however, it was a great journey. And interestingly enough, when I went back into the school and I was successful in the post, and originally I was teaching year 5, the TA that was with me, allocated in my class to support me as I kind of went on, was the same TA that I left. It was the TA that helped me tie my shoelaces and saw me on my merry way when I left in year 6. So it's all very bizarre that I came back and I was face to face with the teaching assistant that waved me goodbye back in 1986 or whatever it was, which was great because we both had an understanding of each other. And interestingly enough, and slightly embarrassingly about it, when I wrote my name and date in the best cursive handwriting I had, she walked from the back of the class, tapped me on my shoulder and said, "You've not joined the A and the O correctly, and you need to do that again." So she was there as a great support. So yeah, I originally trained in secondary school, diverted my career into primary education, and then through that I continued to obviously move up into leadership. And then the opportunity arose to become the principal of this school, Woodstock Primary Academy, in 2000 and I think about 17, 18. And it was brilliant. It was the best thing I ever did. And we're on a journey and interesting times. How the last 10 months have been has been very interesting, and has not brought its challenges, but it's also brought lots of positives in the way that we thought about school organisation, the way that we've kind of embraced our school culture and look to how we enhance our school culture and reach out to our communities during this time. Because I do think at this moment in time, we serve more than just our pupils. We look at how we can support our parents and families as best we can be during this time. So yeah, the last 10 months has been interesting, has been a challenge, but I'm sure like most head teachers in both primary, secondary, and higher education or wherever, I think this has really been an opportunity for us to reflect on our own practice as leaders and probably find out quite a lot about ourselves.
I mean, you've been tested, that's for sure, right?
Oh, without a doubt.
But you've had to adapt. You've had to deal with U-turn change, like the U-turns, the Ofsted complaints, procedures. I mean, yeah, there's all sorts that have happened over the last 12 months. I mean, I think one of the things that's quite remarkable about you, and I don't think you actually mentioned it, but you were in senior leadership in secondary, weren't you? And you actually took a main grade teaching position in a primary school when you transitioned and kind of started pretty much again because you felt really passionate about getting into primary and you're doing work with the primary schools. And I mean, it's remarkable that you made that transition. It's not something that often happens. And I think sometimes schools do frown upon like kind of the switch because they are two very different types of kids. But go on.
Yeah, I think for me, it was that point of, and I dare, it's really hard to say sometimes, but I felt that I was becoming a little bit stale. And I felt that, I was teaching a subject which I thoroughly enjoyed. And strangely enough, I wanted to make sure that I was going to be really creative. I wanted to be creative. I'd done lots of theatre and sort of performing artwork based work and all of those things. And I was really worried if I went into something other than, the industry of kind of the arts, that you'd have that lack of creativity. So I went in to teach drama and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I can be creative every day. But actually, when you're teaching the same syllabus and approaching the same text, I felt that creativity was just becoming a little bit stale. And I was doing the same thing. So going into a primary classroom where you had the whole breadth of subjects that I'd never taught before in my life. I'd never taught maths. I'd never taught science. DT, food, cooking, and all of these things were completely outside my skill set. And some teaching assistants would agree that they still were outside my skill set because they would always bail me out. So yeah, I think it was the right thing to do because sometimes you just need to default and kind of switch. And I was very lucky, I must admit, I was very lucky to go to a school where I had a connection with, and I was also very lucky that the head teacher there, who is still a very, very good friend of mine, saw some potential as this kind of secondary school teacher coming into the primary setting and sort of went, okay, we'll give him a chance, because I didn't really have a great understanding of primary education and what had gone before. So I thank that person quite a lot because they gave me the opportunity to do that. So, I think some people, if you do feel that there's a need to switch or look at a different sector or a different phase, all power to you, because I think it is important that you try and experiment and go where you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably not giving yourself enough credit. I think you're very charismatic. It is very infectious. I think it'd be very difficult for a head teacher to maybe turn you down, in fairness to you, and especially if you're
thank you very much.
Especially if you're going to step down from like senior leadership and actually go into a main grade role to kind of prove your worth and prove your point and take on the challenge. I mean, I think that's pretty awesome. That's I mean, if I was an employer or a head teacher for a primary school, I'd be like, this guy is awesome. I mean, he's willing to step down. He's willing to really like show me what he's about, and he's willing to take a chance. I think that's brilliant. But I mean, ultimately, there's a lot around that kind of curriculum aspect, isn't there? I mean, you teach the same thing year in, year out. There's a lot of teachers that end up leaving the profession because it does kill creativity for a lot of teachers. I mean, they feel that they'd want to kind of experiment, be creative in the way that they teach children. I mean, is that something that is like, I know you feel it and you probably can't speak for everybody else, but is that something that we need to kind of address and have more autonomy to be creative in the way that we teach children?
I think so. I think for us, I mean, I'm talking now through a particular primary lens, really, is the fact is that I think we do need to think about the skill set in which we train teachers and how they kind of approach lesson planning and approach how they deliver the curriculum, because I don't know whether or not initial teacher training or that kind of the training route that you had, especially that I didn't have that skill to be able to look at a lesson and go, right, how can I do this creatively? It was just probably something that was, I've got a really good idea. And possibly because I taught drama, it was a lot easier. But I think as we move into kind of the new world, I think there's an opportunity to really be creative about how we look at the curriculum and look at how we're really going to engage children. And unfortunately, I suppose with the social distancing mechanisms that have been put in place in schools, it's reduced the way that we can think creatively. We've been kind of pushed back to the model of, you know, teacher at the front, because we've had to kind of keep children in bubbles or in rows and to limit that contact. So I think when we come out of, you know, wherever we're going and wherever hopefully we will see some changes, I don't think maybe on Monday on the 22nd, but, you know, when we come out of this all together, I hope that we'll be able to get into classrooms and be far more creative in regards to the layout, far more creative about how we approach subjects, and really have those conversations about, you know, whole school culture in which we agree as practitioners or within a school that, you know, the way that we approach our pedagogy and practice is driven through creativity, and to move as far away as possible from what we've kind of been, I suppose, unfortunately enforced upon us because of the you know, mitigating risks of transmissions in classrooms.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do feel sometimes we focus so much on the what and the hows, but I think sometimes it's like with the wrong question, you know. I think like sometimes I do question whether education is actually fit for purpose and if we're doing children the right service in some respects. I mean, there's a lot of children, I mean, the current system will always work for that do well in exams, that are great academically, but there are a lot of children that are creative, innovative, that are great with speaking, that have a lot of high levels of empathy, that just don't get to showcase their best abilities in the current education system in the way that it's assessed. I mean, do you think that currently the education system is fit for purpose? And if not, then what kind of needs to improve?
I think it's very hard, isn't it? Because I think anything will, you know, any system is going to have its faults. Any system is not going to be perfect and not matched. And just like you've rightly said, and I think, I mean, my going back to my previous experience of secondary school, and now I'm referencing, you know, maybe 15, 16 years ago, there was definitely a kind of gap missing for those students who wanted to follow a vocational route, and there wasn't a great deal of lack of opportunity. There was a lack of opportunity there for you know, apprenticeships and actually kind of hands-on vocational courses. And I think some schools were good at that and some schools weren't. And hopefully, I mean, I'm sure that's moved on, and speaking to colleagues in the sector, you can see that there's more of an opportunity for people to, you know, pupils to develop that. I think when it comes to primary, I think one of the things that we need to do is really think about, you know, of creating a curriculum and creating a school culture. And I see those two things equally entwined together, that the curriculum should be representative of your school culture, about really working with the content of the school and the pupils that you have. And if you notice that you do see, you know, large proportions of children who need to have more, you know, creative outlets, or need to have more of a vocational, you know, even in such early years, about having those opportunities to learn through different ways, or we look at our curriculum that builds those skills or identifies deficits in the community that we serve. I think we have that ability to really think carefully and put our stamp on it and say, actually, this is our curriculum and we're doing this because A, B, C, and these are the things that we're trying to address through that. So I know us as a school, you know, our curriculum is very heavily based on PSHE, RE, and they're our key drivers, because we know that understanding of different cultures, the understanding of different faiths, actually, you know, our interpersonal skills and our social skills, we believe that they're really important. So we really push our curriculum through those lenses and through those drivers, because it's the important part of our school, that these are the core things, and everything then comes under that. You know, we want children to feel confident, want children to have that kind of sense of purpose and see their own sense of motivation and drive. So we do that first to allow them to then access this, you know, rich curriculum of subjects and experiences.
I mean, I love that. I mean, I love it. I mean, that's everything I kind of preach about, and it's everything I kind of shout about online, especially on LinkedIn. I don't know if obviously you are on LinkedIn, but I mean, I think sometimes maybe people take it the wrong way, but I think there's so I massively credit the teaching profession, but I think there are systemic failures that kind of let us down. But when I hear about head teachers doing things in their school, like you're doing in your primary school, I mean, that's what it should be about. It should be really about helping kids find their passion and their niche and help them develop as people and show compassion and understand different cultures. I mean, that is the 21st century. I mean, we've got such diversity throughout the globe now. I mean, it's so easy for us to go to different parts of the world and around the country, and there's just so many different cultures, isn't there? So I think that should be embedded into every school in some respects. But I mean, so in terms of obviously having the flexibility to have like kind of do the curriculum the way that you want, I mean, do you feel like you have enough autonomy, or is that something that you kind of need more support with?
I think it's interesting because I think sometimes autonomy can be misconstrued as this kind of golden ideal that we can all go off and do our own thing. And actually, I think some ways along the line is that autonomy is sometimes about the autonomy of collaboration and actually working together with people and feeling to build a better offer altogether. So, and I think sometimes, I suppose in the academy sector that people say about losing their autonomy because they've kind of joined a collective of schools. And I think really the autonomy is, I think autonomy is great, but I think it's great if it's based around collaboration as well. I know that sounds like a bit of a dichotomy, but actually I think autonomy is a bit of a lonely place, that if you want to put yourself out there and we're being completely autonomous, but actually if we kind of go, well, we're collective and we're working together and collaborating and sharing ideas and developing ideas together, I think the autonomy to do that is the most important thing. I think there's always a risk of going off a limb and you've got no measures or no kind of guidance to sort of, or kind of anything to gauge where you're kind of going. Going back to the point there about curriculum and culture and about autonomy and reflecting your own, being autonomous in your curriculum choices, especially around your school culture and the context of your school, I think that's important, that you have to be able to identify your school and you have to recognize that you are an individual entity and you have your own independent factors and your own significant issues or barriers or areas of success and areas of development. And I think where we sometimes get it wrong is that we see sometimes curriculum separate to school culture. And actually the things we do to build our school culture are the learning points. So as a school, we're very, very, we believe completely, and I'm sure lots of schools do it, but we make sure that actually every member of senior leadership team and every member of staff on the day, every day, in the morning and in the afternoon, we are the orange high-vis brigade. So we wear these big orange high-vis vests, and we go out and we do it because we want to be visible. But also what we also do is make sure that when a child says good morning to us, we say good morning back and use their name. And that's a bit of a non-negotiable. That's what we do. And it's not because we do it because it's a habit, or it's not, we don't do it because it just happened. We did it because we intentionally planned it, because we recognize that interaction and belonging is really important. So all of the things around our school that we've been autonomous on are actually fundamental things that we believe.
Yeah.
I think I've answered that question. I don't know if I have.
I think that's so important, isn't it? I think the culture and I think any leader or anyone that's in position of power should be able to lead everyone on this vision of what they want, where they want everyone to go. That includes the parents, that includes the senior leadership team, that includes the teachers and obviously the children, right? And the parents, obviously. But I think sometimes the struggle is to try to get everyone on board. I think sometimes what head teachers end up doing is dictating, and it's not from a collaborative approach, and it's not about empowering children. It's about teachers are the teachers, those who empower are those empower, and it's about bringing children up to their level in some respects. I mean, you only need to look at certain head teachers that very much traditionalists. They still believe that standing in front of the classroom is the best way to teach children, and all children can learn the same. I mean, what's your kind of view on that?
I think I would feel very awkward being a leader that obviously you have hierarchical structures in school, and they're there to make sure that the accountability level is lent with me. I know that I carry the can for every decision, and what I try to do is make that really clear with my staff and say, look, I will carry the can. If it's a mistake or a problem, it's my fault. What I want to do and what we're trying to do, and what I'm always trying to remind myself to do, is to make sure I'm as transparent and authentic as possible. I don't want to spend my time feeling exhausted trying to be a caricature of a leader or a head teacher that I think is the best fit. I can only be myself. And I think when you're only being yourself, you can then develop positive relationships with your staff and move them forward. I think that's really important. If you become a caricature, all you do is spend your time being a caricature, and you can't even navigate relationships because you're second guessing how you should be pretending, creating relationships. So for me, to get staff with you is about being you and being completely honest in your strengths, but also completely honest with your weaknesses. And interesting, I've just written an article for Head Teacher magazine about transparency and about transparent leadership, because now is the time where we do need to put our hands up and say, I don't have all the answers now. This is completely out of my training. This is out of my ballpark. And there might be things I'm going to slip up on. And what we've tried to do as a school, but also as a trust as well, is we've consulted with staff every single step of the way. So every fortnight I send out a survey or questionnaire, just to share people's comments and just say, look, how are we doing? Have you got an idea about how we can do that? We're very much about, I'm very much about, my senior leadership team are about getting ideas from teachers, sharing, developing working groups, so, sharing cross ideas from TAs to staff to middle leadership team. We are a collective of individuals and adults, and actually you have to go where the information is. I won't have the best ideas around how we organise lunchtime. The person who has the best ideas is probably my brilliant teaching assistants who do a lot of the lunchtime cover, who will then tell me, actually, Dan, this is the best way to do it. This is what we've seen. If I impose ideas, it's just not going to work, and no one's going to feel empowered, no one's going to feel successful, and no one's going to feel a sense of identity with what we're doing as a school. So naturally, I don't have the ideas about certain areas because I just don't have the information, So it's about trusting staff and trusting adults and trusting everybody in the organisation to share their passion and to give ideas. And we will be doing that more and more so, I suppose, as we go through this, because who knows what happens on the 22nd when we start looking at schools and what the reopening of schools look like. And there's going to need to be a real sense of creativity, but it can't be driven by one person. It has to be shared and it has to be consulted upon, because if not, I wonder what people's roles are if it is going into leadership and not having that consultative approach, because for me, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I absolutely believe in collaboration, but there are unfortunately some senior leaders or head teachers that are very much it's our way, because I think you do obviously have to hold everyone accountable, and responsibility does lie on you, doesn't it? So in some ways, if you know how to do something in a certain way, you want people to replicate what you're doing because it works.
Of course.
So how do you kind of have that fine line? I mean, how do you make sure you don't go over that fine line between being on top of someone too much, but still giving him, like, kind of empowering them, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I think we as a school, we have the Woodstock way, which is the way in which and this is through collaboration, that as groups of teachers and professionals, we'll look at what makes, a really effective English lesson, or we'll look at what makes a really effective, intervention. And what we're doing in the process is making sure that we kind of agree some, I wouldn't say non-negotiables, because I think non-negotiables are a bit of a tricky word, because sometimes things have to be negotiable because things don't go right. But kind of the fantastic five, the five really, active ingredients that we kind of agree that's what we believe is going to make that lesson zing, or that's the best way of approaching, reading, or that's the way of approaching, an intervention or an after school group, all of those things. And I think if we can have that collaborative understanding of what are our key measures and what it is we're trying to address, and what it is that, why we're doing it in the first place, I think if people know that, then that kind of accountability and that kind of understanding of, you know, everybody's role in creating that it becomes a lot easier. If you share that vision, but actually share it with the contents and the reasoning behind it, people kind of go, okay, I see that. Yeah. And if everything's child-centered and pupil-focused, and say we're doing this because we want the best for our kids or best for the pupils in our school, then it becomes a moral thing as well, because you're there because of the children. So if we kind of agree that set of principles and say, right, this is what we're doing, this is how we do something, immediately kind of go, right, I see that. And everybody you working in schools are there for the same reason.
I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, just out of curiosity, do you ever read Simon Sinek? Like, so start with why.
Yeah.
I mean, you literally describe with like what he basically talks about, and it's about looking at the end goal and getting everybody aligned to that vision and get everyone moving to the same direction. And sometimes I think, like, even just in secondary or like in secondary school, I know you're a primary specialist, but it sometimes feels like it's all about the exams and it's about content. And even recently we're asking questions about how do we catch kids up to what, you know? I mean, like, should we I think what we should be asking is, how do we bridge the gap between school and the workplace, and how do we make sure these kids are going to be all right? Because what are we going to do, cram 18 months worth of work in 6 months, you know? And I think we've got to really be asking different questions.
I think there's some big significant questions to be had, and I think my concern is that those conversations are probably not happening not as quickly as possible, but as, you know, watching the room, I don't know if there's anything coming that's sort of suggesting that we should have these conversations, because I think there is some really big conversations to be had, especially around, you know, obviously within primary, from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 2 and EYFS, it's about establishing what it is that and you're right, it's about the building blocks, because we can't, you know, there's always going to be, you know, certain gaps and bits and pieces of, you know, missed information and some misconceptions in children learning, and you do that over time, because, you know, you sometimes get children in year 6 who still have that misconception about that division fact or whatever, and you do address those as you go along. With the time limited fact that we've got, I suppose, before the next academic year, it's about whether we go back and fill all the gaps, or whether we look forward and start going, what are the fundamental things and skills, knowledge and skills that these children need to make sure that they can bridge the gap to the next year?
Yeah.
And ensure that there's, you know, really good informed practice going on next academic year to really iron out those creases as you go along. I think the big conversations, I think, are around obviously Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, because we've got a group of children who have had their year 5 academic year, you know, stalled and, you know, thwarted by this, you know, pandemic, and then gone into another year. So there's 2 years of, you know, maybe missed learning, where we can say that there has been learning, but the lockdown of maybe the first year, or lockdown 1 or March 2020, was very different to where we are now. So there's a big conversation to be had about Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, and especially with the removal of SATs as a measure, as crude as they probably would have been at this time, it may have given some indication, but there's got to be a parity between that nationally, because, you know, we need to have some agreed kind of agreement of what people might need from Key Stage 2 to 3. But especially, I think, in regards to Key Stage 5 to higher education, I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation in regards to those students who have really had their sixth form education, you know, challenged and reduced, and especially with the removal of the AS, you know, and then obviously the removal of the A2 qualifications, and I'm sure that's the case, and I'll be probably corrected that I might be wrong, but speaking to people in higher education, how do they prepare not only children for the academic rigor of higher education and the independent study of higher education, but also just the content of that one particular subject for them to kind of channel themselves into. So it's a very interesting time. My concern is that these conversations are not in advance of possibly where we are in the reopening of schools. And I worry about doing that on an individual level or a local level, because it will create a difference nationally around where children are and maybe their gaps. So we have really got to think about having a sense of equality and equity in regards to what we're teaching, when we go up. And it's not about, obviously, that's it, we only teach that, because we will know that there's lots of children who will need definitely more, support as we go through. But yeah, I just think there's a conversation to be had, because when you take out all of those external markers and measures, and we all have very different, opinions about statutory exams and external exams, where do we go then to make sure there's an equity of that all children are prepared for the next step?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's it. You talk about obviously the jump to sort of year 7 from year 6, but also those kids and sorry, A levels, but also those kids that are doing year 10 at the moment.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
Like they haven't done year 10 or year 11, and it's a big jump up to A levels in itself, isn't it? I think I always find that I've never put my finger on it, but I think there's always been that big jump from GCSEs to A levels and then A levels to university, and I think you've just kind of nailed it on the head. It's down to the independence, right? You have a lot more independent learning. I mean, is that a flaw in itself? I mean, do we need to have more independent learning throughout school so it's not as much of a jump? It's something that kids and students kind of are adjusted to.
I think it's really interesting, because I don't know if we're kind of in building those skills at the moment during remote learning, and the successes of that, and I think this is something that we might see, and I know that there'll be lots of, we talk a lot about those pupils who have, not had a great time during lockdown, and I do think as well, we do need to think about, I definitely think about early years and nursery children, about how we can make sure that those aspects of socialization, those really important communicative skills that they develop in the early years, about making sure that we can get those back as soon as possible. But I think what we're seeing further up the school, and especially I suppose as you go into secondary education, we might be seeing more children who are being led by their own learning path, understanding their own kind of flow in regards to their own time management, how long it takes, how long they organize themselves, making sure that there's a level of independence of being ready to learn even in their own environment, because getting ready for school is very different to getting ready to go on a Teams meeting or a Zoom session. So I think there's some skills there that we might see come forward. And I think it'd be really great to think that actually, and a bit of kind of, without using a cliche of blue sky thinking, but it'd be really interesting to think about how we develop this independence, throughout our schools, because we've always been governed by a very strict timetable of timetables, of this kind of very organized sort of Chronos kind of split up hour by hour. This is what we do, and we move to it by there. And we've always argued the fact that actually, learning should be a little bit more fluid. We always talk about progress being measured in lessons. Well, how can you measure progress if some child's just got it? And, we talk about that, and we talk about progress over time. So really, we've got this interesting time where children have been, maybe a bit more of a flexible timetable from remote learning, being able to navigate their own independence, being set challenges which are a bit more open. And we've seen that in the primary sector. Some of the science experiments we may have set, and dare I say it, it was always very exciting to set a science experiment on Teams and say, have a go, and keeping our fingers crossed that we didn't set someone's house on fire. But the things that we've seen are children sharing their learning, being really creative. And I've seen lots of work, I've just been reviewing some photos of some year 5 learning about space, and children creating their own models of the solar system by using found objects around their house and creating their own PowerPoints, and having that real sense of extended learning developed by their own independent practice, not being led but facilitated, which I think is a very different skill to what we move into currently in teaching. We don't probably do enough of that facilitation of learning rather than that teaching, that direct teaching. So I think independence hopefully might come to the forefront, and it's these skills that we need to recognize that have been ignited in some of our younger children and developed further on pupils in their educational career. So yeah, I think independence could be something that we could see come out of this as a bonus. And I think what we've got to do is make sure that we don't really kind of analyze what's gone on with remote learning, and take that and kind of, well, we could run with this, and we could make, actually going back to that creative classroom, going back to that curriculum that really addresses those skills of those children. We might actually find a class which is actually children developing their own timelines and time frames and curriculum to complete these tasks, quite independently over a period of school day. So it's interesting. It depends what we want to go back to.
I think it's
rather
really
than what we want to embrace.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because when you say those things, it reminds me of the real world, like places like Google and like the FTSE 100 companies. I mean, that's what they do, right? They are very creative, they're innovative, they collaborate, they come up with ideas that just they haven't done before, And actually, that's what we need for the 21st century. That's the kind of workforce that we need to be developing. So I think we'd be massively missing a trick if we kind of go back to the way that we've always done things. I mean, I haven't heard anybody kind of talk about kind of the home learning in the way that you have, but it's really, really interesting that certain children are being so creative. And actually, that's what the real world needs. We need people that are going to be able to challenge ideas, that are going to be innovative. If another pandemic happens, they need to find the virus. Like they need people who need to like challenge the status quo. Like things need to change and develop, and that's what we need to develop in our future workforce. So, I mean, I think it'd be a massive like missed opportunity if we go back to an education system where it is very time focused, very factorized, where it's very time driven, content driven, exam driven. I mean, like, what's your kind of overall view on that?
I think they're interesting. I think there's a time and place for that, and I do think that we will need to, when the children come back, we need to establish cultures again. First and foremost, we need to make sure that we develop the trust. We earn the trust and respect back of pupils, because we've been, as much as children have been connecting with their teachers via Teams or whatever, we've been very two-dimensional. And I think being back in a classroom with other adults, being back in a classroom with other children, as much as they have been connected, probably more so than they have during the first lockdown. There's going to be a real need to make sure that we develop cultures and learning and behaviors for learning again. And some of that might be, that might not be a big thing, or a time-bound thing. But actually, sometimes we might say, look, for the next 2 weeks or whatever, we're just going to go easy into this, because there is that rush that we rush into this catch-up, and we rush into this rather diagnostic testing system, which and I don't know if people have their various different ways of assessing where gaps are, at the detriment of the cultural piece that we're kind of developing those skills, because we've just got to, I think we've got to take our time into the reopening. But I think, going back to your question, I think it is really important that, we maintain those conversations about independence as we go through. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because we've kind of been in this way of education for such a long time, but it's taken a pandemic for us to really, really reflect that we can make a change. And I think the last 12 months have really shown us that teachers can adapt. They are really resilient, and ultimately they can do it. But I think there's always going to be people that just feel like the education should stay the same way, and it should be very much kind of the way that it's always been. And you should be standing in front of the classroom and teaching to kids, and they should learn the same way. I know I kind of repeated what I said earlier, but I mean, like do those educators need to maybe rethink that?
I think to be fair, I think, everybody has their own way and everybody's doing it for the right reasons. I think, going back to your previous questions about, having complete, maybe independence, and then going back to the kind of rigidity of lessons, I think there'll be a place for that when children come back, because there's that safety in constraints, there's that safety in, right, now we're going to do this and now we're going to do that. So I think we establish a framework again with children, just to make sure that they feel secure and safe in the environment that they are. And then what we can do is widen those constraints a little bit further to meet the skills that they've developed over time. I think every head teacher and every leader is always looking to make sure that they're doing the best by their pupils. And I think it's always important that, as long as we're reflecting on what we're doing, as long as we're listening, and as long as we're consulting, not just with our senior leaders, but with our teachers and every adult in the school, and equally as well, we're listening to our pupils and our parents, because, I think sometimes sometimes as leaders, we have a responsibility to develop our own thinking and our own outlook and to develop our own practice continually. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes the time limited factors that we have as leaders probably puts a barrier on our own personal CPD. And there is that risk of doing things that we did before, not because of we're kind of stuck in our own kind of traditionalist models, or this is I know that works. It's actually we've just not had a chance to communicate and discuss outside our own school, to go and see good practice, to speak to educators. So I think it's really important, podcasts like this, when you're having really good conversations, like he says, being interviewed for a podcast and saying it's really good, but listening to really informative conversations that bring a different opinion to kind of go, well, I've never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
And absolutely. Actually, we need to make sure that there's a collaboration going on and sharing of ideas. And it goes with that sense of, we talk about autonomy, that sometimes we feel that being autonomous is a trait of highly skilled leadership. I'm autonomous. I can do things on my own back. I don't need anybody. I'm pretty autonomous. Actually, for me, I feel the skills of leaders, some of the most highly skilled leaders that I've met are those who have said, brilliant, tell me about what you're doing. Or can we do something together on that? And start bridging bridging those things. So I think autonomy is a risk, and it's about making sure that you can be autonomous but collaborative as well.
I think you're absolutely bang on. I think I always kind of look at it as leaders are the ones that inspire other leaders, right? And it's about kind of empowering your staff and actually like running with the ideas and trusting them. I mean, that's what I think of autonomy is working together collaboratively and actually trying to push a vision forward, And I think overall, everybody that's in education, well, should think like this. They should be thinking about what is going to really make a difference to children, right? And ultimately, if everybody wants the same thing, why aren't we taking nuggets from what other people are doing around the world and bring them into our practice? I mean, we don't have to do everything the exact same way. I mean, our cultures are going to be very different. Obviously, our demographics are going to be very different, but there are people doing some fantastic things out there. So why aren't we like globally working like on the education system together?
I think it's interesting. And one of the things that we need to do is really establish methods of communication and methods of collaboration. And I go back to social media playing a really big part. I mean, my life, as a teacher, and again, when I was at secondary school, and I'm not saying Twitter may have saved my career in secondary teaching, and it may have made me a better drama teacher, but when I started in primary school, 2010 or around that time, Twitter was probably in its infancy, and all of a sudden there was this thing of, oh, you can follow other teachers and they've got some resources and they can talk about it, and all of a sudden you're in these groups where you're speaking to the primary teachers and you're going, oh, well, so I felt really supported by those networks. And I think that's still something now currently where I do say to my staff, get yourself onto Twitter, start engaging this community, there's conversations out there. I think one of the things that we do very badly as educators is we tell a lot of people that we talk about, well, let's not reinvent the wheel, but we then end up reinventing the wheel because we're having that conversation about not reinventing the wheel. We are constantly doing things the hard way. And I don't know whether it's out of, just kind of time that you don't have that time to collaborate and we'll do it ourselves, or we are just entrenched in that thing of fear of the imposter syndrome, because when we're asking for help or reaching out, it looks like we can't manage our own work or our own kind of domain. So I think, going back to your question about collaboration, I think more and more so it's key. I think people need to network and people need to be out there. And also as well, I think, even maybe on a higher level, from the DFE or from a governmental level, there might be opportunities where people can network and share ideas, and passing those up to the powers that be, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that needs to happen anyway. I think there's such a disconnect sometimes between those that are in the profession and those that are in power. But just kind of on that collaborative approach, I mean, do league tables and Ofsted gradings, do they hinder collaboration?
I think it's really hard, isn't it? Because I think sometimes, especially in the public sector, we always feel that we're the only people that are judged by some kind of measure. We always talk about league tables, but, I think, I'm sure there's lots of practice managers in the NHS who are kind of still, railing from the league tables about their GP waiting times and bed uptake in hospitals. So all of us have had these measures and are some way measured by these leagues and these titles. And I think it's some ways about I think first, in regards to public measures, I think it's about making sure that they're placed within context rather than just, just headlines and snapshots. So I think, I think back to my school, the Ofsted inspection we had under the new framework was, I'm not going to say, it was what do I say, enjoyable experience, but a beneficial experience, a really good quality couple of days where I spent a good opportunity to talk about my school and kind of work through where we were. And actually, I think what was quite nice about it was that although we had a very mixed bag, we were a school on improvement, and we had some goods, we had some requires improvements, which we knew that we were going to get. The context around how they were presented felt very different to previous expectations. So I think really when we start producing, outcomes, or we start putting titles on places, I think the fact is that they're taken out of context. So having that context, I think what it is at the moment, and I, as a leader of a requires improvement school, and we're moving towards good, and that's the journey that we're on, is the fact is that I think maybe, and I probably felt this myself, and I don't think it was the detriment. I don't think it was about, receiving an Ofsted grade, but you do have this kind of feeling that actually that because I'm a requires improvement school, am I not as good as leader as someone who's an outstanding school? So you start thinking about, you have that kind of career kind of questions of, well, I'm just a requires improvement head teacher. And actually you're not, because we're all leaders and we're all facing different challenges. So maybe there's that kind of, difficulty of sometimes we reflect very heavily and we see it quite personally, but what we're looking at is a school, and actually what we're assessing is a school. So it's not about leaders individually. And I think, maybe, and I think I've probably felt this myself, is the fact is it probably did kind of go, well, maybe I'm not that great. But actually, when you reflect on it, you are moving to a position where, you are a leader and your ideas are equally as valid as someone who's in an outstanding school. So I think we do need to, obviously we have measures, and everybody has league tables, no matter, probably what sector you work in, there is always something of a measure of an accountability. It's just important that we if we are publicly sharing these measures of accountability, that they're done within a context, and the narrative that sits below them is presented as an equal factor. So you can be an RI, we're an RI school, we're an RI school on paper, but the first line of our Ofsted report was the school was a rapidly improving school and all children. Do you know what I mean? So it's that you one has to go with the other.
I mean, I completely get what you're saying, but sometimes when you are labelled as an RI or a special measure school, it's very difficult for you to attract the right quality staff. Sometimes it's really hard to get parents on board or get parents to send their children to your school. And ultimately, if you've got a school down the road that is good or outstanding, I mean, effectively, like they've become your competition, because parents are going to want to send their kids there based off what's on paper, and ultimately, I know as a leader, you're just as important as someone in outstanding school. In fact, you're probably more important, in my opinion, because you're the one that's really making a difference, right? And not saying that head teachers in outstanding schools aren't making a difference, but you're taking the school on a journey. It's really difficult when you're in an RI situation. You take on over a school. I know the challenges that you naturally face. So, and it's that much harder when you've got the label on you. No,
I do think so, because I think people see those terminologies, and again, it goes back to that context. And I think it's about making sure that, one of the things that we know as a requires improvement school is the fact that we really need to celebrate everything that we do. And I think there is a kind of PR machine that you have to kind of manage yourself. And I do think, regardless of where you are, is about making sure you really celebrate the things that you do and what makes you unique as a school. Because, and I also think as well, it's about making sure that people recognize that they're never permanent. These markers are never permanent. They're snapshots of where that school currently is. And I think it's important that some schools do not always remain outstanding. Some schools do not always remain good. And so it's all about that. It's a snapshot at that time that's being presented.
The only problem with that, though, is those schools that are outstanding, I mean, they don't get checked again for another 5 years.
Well, there's always these there's always these issues of the system, isn't it? But I think, I sometimes feel for those teachers of outstanding schools, because there is that thing of, you take on a very, the weight of an outstanding school and the expectation of that. And I sometimes think about the journey that I've been on, taking a school from where we were to where we are now. But actually, as an outstanding school, I don't know how I would feel being a principal of an outstanding school and not having that measure, or just someone, obviously you've got your measures of external validation and you can invite external practitioners in, but making sure that you maintain that while you're not being inspected. So it's very hard. I think it's very hard. And I don't think like you say, we've reached that kind of level of how this system, Ofsted system, works. I think it's moving in the right direction, without a doubt. I think there's far more transparency. The inspection that we faced felt very, very different to inspections I've had before, when it was a bit done to. I mean, I was heavily supported, and the conversations I had with the lead inspections were just very open and really, empowering. But yeah, I completely agree. We have got a disconnect between how we view outstanding schools and how we view outside, requires improvement schools. So we have got a disconnect there. And I think equally it makes everybody's jobs really hard, because, especially if you were outstanding under the old framework, and the new framework's, nearly 2 years old now. How do you measure your success? Because it's important. So I think everybody has their challenges. I think we have a system that's moving in the right direction. I think, Ofsted are being far more transparent in what they're saying. There's been some really engaging conversations on Twitter from representatives of Ofsted. And I think that, the conversations I've had in inspections have also been very, personal and very, supportive.
It's good to hear, because I think there is a place for Ofsted. I don't think Ofsted needs to go. What I do disapprove of, though, is the league tables. I genuinely do believe that there shouldn't be the competition between schools. I mean, you should be a good school, or a school that kind of needs improvement, and then you get a supportive, kind of plan, and people that are going to come and support you get to that, good point, right? I mean, the league.
I think there's definitely something there, and I know that there's rumours of removing the outstanding title altogether. So I think there is those conversations that might be taking place, who knows, but I think there is that kind of understanding about the plan and support. So yeah, I think it's there, but I think it all dependent on maybe local authority level as well, about how they can support you in regards to moving forward, because trusts and academy structures are very different to the local authority. So it's about, I suppose, what support is out there within local authorities to help. And again, that goes back to obviously funding mechanisms and bits and pieces on local government level to make sure they can support schools to take that level of improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the multi-academy trust model. I mean, I would just wish it was throughout. So it's because you got as a Matt, you have a very collaborative approach in general, because you're kind of always kind of exchanging practitioners, or you're talking about things, and you're talking about kind of ways to improve the schools within your Matt. What I'd love to see is it on a national scale and a global scale. I mean, how far do you think we are from getting to that point?
I think obviously, without kind of speaking completely out of my depth, really, I think really in regards to, government funding for local authorities to improve education is hugely important in that. We do need to make sure that local authority schools are really, really heavily supported financially, and to make sure that they can bring in the best professionals to support leaders. And also make sure that buildings are fit for purpose as well. We had a big spate of, building schools for the future, but again, we're still looking at schools which are, inefficient in regards to their heating and those kinds of things that have a massive impact on a leader's budget, and especially wear and tear on buildings, capital expenses, especially in regards to just the maintaining of the building and furniture and all of those things have a very, very heavy impact on people's, diminishing and narrowing budgets. So I think it's about making sure that there's an element of, local authority and also government thinking about, educational funding per se, really. But without getting into the kind of finer details to it, I think it all comes down to that thing of, making sure that funding is placed in the right places for everybody, to make sure that we're really thinking about, where we go next. And maybe, without kind of, maybe too much kind of, fortune telling, that maybe there will be that need now where we've had this pandemic. We've seen obviously the necessity for the government to intervene with digital devices. That's and as much as we kind of argue about how successful that's been, and I'm sure there's geographical areas which have probably not had the biggest resources in regards to laptops going out to schools, there's something there which is very symbolic of where we are, that actually there is a big divide with who has devices and who has a connection to the internet. So I think hopefully we can come out at this point and go, well, actually, if we were having to give laptops to children and to households, and we had to give out this enormity of amount, as much as it is kind of a, if it did come to its fruition and that was the amount of laptops they had to give out. And again, I'm not saying it's been a perfect fit, because I know that it's not been as perfect as, it's probably originally purported to be. But there is a signal there to sort of say, hang on a minute, why is that? Why is that?
Absolutely. And hopefully, like with the way that education is evolving and the way that people are kind of perceiving how to like build relationships with children and trying to give every child an opportunity to succeed, I think a lot of people are starting to see that, right? And I think by doing so, I think we will reduce that gap between the advantaged and the disadvantaged. I think COVID has highlighted the gap more than kind of created it, if that makes sense. And I think right now we have an opportunity to actually create opportunities for millions of children that slip through the cracks every single year. And I think we really need to reevaluate what the purpose of education is and what the end goal is. And if it's just to teach kids basics, just to get them through to 18, and I think we're massively missing a trick in education. And I think we should be helping kids find their niche and their passions and really supporting them to get to really create opportunities for themselves, not necessarily through like education or getting a degree, but actually make something of themselves, bringing in leadership, entrepreneurship, like debating skills, presentation, like empathy, love, compassion, like those things that are currently missing from the curriculum. But I think, well, you made a really good point at the beginning. It needs to be aligned with your ethos and the curriculum, right? And I think they need to go hand in hand.
And I think for me on this is the fact is that we've got an opportunity, and I feel really passionate about this, that we've got an opportunity to really, really reflect on our education system now. We've had this, and again, it's born out of tragedy. No one envisaged that something like this would ever happen. And here we are, we've the last 2 academic years have been, blighted by this horrible pandemic. Lots of people, there's been a huge emotional turmoil for lots of people and some real tragedy that's gone on. But we've got, I suppose we've got the opportunity now to really think about what wasn't going right in our education system. And now we've got to really think about, what do we want to go back to? What do we want to go back to? And I think if we kind of handpick those things and go, you know what, we'll keep that bit, because we've learned lots of things in regards to the organisation of buildings. I mean, that's one thing. And those things about social time, and you ask any leader, virtual parents' evenings will always be there forever and a day, I think. But I think what we've got to do is really go, what wasn't working? What really wasn't working? Because it's, to be honest, the areas of the areas of the gaps, the disadvantaged areas have been those disadvantaged areas for year upon year upon year upon year. So we know that there's gaps between, we talk a lot about boys writing, we talk a lot about reading, we talk a lot about maths and all of the gaps in certain areas of the schools. So now is the opportunity to kind of go, right, well, we have got this kind of blueprint for a new future. We've got the opportunity to kind of really think about how we present education moving forward. And I think what we've got to do is to have that time to have those conversations.
I agree.
And I think it's really, really important.
I agree. I mean, that's exactly what the podcast is all about, is to have these conversations and ask the questions. I mean, I don't know the answers to everything. Nobody does, right? But I think it's very important to have these conversations and play devil's advocate to the things that we've done in some respects.
Completely. And I think challenge each other and go, hang on, did it really work? Why are we doing that? Yeah. Why are we going back to that? Well, it's what we always did. Yeah, but did it work? Did it work? Let's look at the efficacy of some of our interventions. Let's look at the efficacy of how we, developed our schools, because we'll find that we're probably entrenched with routines and ways of doing things that actually we've just done because we've never really thought about it as much as we should, but never really had the time to do that. And I know that everybody's really busy. Leaders are all very, very busy at the moment in time, to the point where, we know that there's that sense of overriding burnout in our profession.
Absolutely.
But I think the time to chat and time to reflect is now.
100%. I mean, like just the burnout and the whole high stakes accountability, everything. It's burning the profession out. And it's, in my opinion, like I know we talked about league tables and Ofsted. I mean, we'll leave it there, but like I know we talked about it, but I think like it just causes a drift within the profession. I mean, like we need to be working ways where we're not burning teachers out. The planning, the data, all of that is not the main focus. It's all about students and how we're going to help them excel. And after the last year that we've had, we're never going to catch them up to where we would have wanted them to be if obviously COVID didn't happen. So I think we need to be thinking about what we're going to do to actually make sure we are helping these kids and we are reducing the gap between the advantage and disadvantage, and we are really supporting those kids that need opportunities. I mean, every year the gap gets bigger between the advantage and disadvantage, and we kind of do the same thing expecting different results, and then we talk about it. But I think we've got an absolute perfect opportunity to make that change, and I really just hope we take it.
Likewise.
But yeah, look, Dan, we'll leave it there. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I mean,
thank you very, very much. It's always good to talk.
Yeah, no worries, mate. A lot of food for thought there. So hopefully people listen.
I hope so.
But yeah, enjoy, and look, I'll enjoy the rest of your half term, and we'll catch up in the future, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Cheers, Dan. Bye.